Well, it's been in the news a lot lately about the Panama Canal and accusations that the 1977 treaty were being broken and violated, and that meant that it should be retaken by the United States. So I decided to go to the Panama Canal Museum and check out the facts for myself. All right, I am in Casco Viejo, and I decided that I'm going to take a little tour through the Panama Canal Museum. And actually, as I was driving down here, I listened to two very informative documentaries on YouTube. I'll try and find those links and put them in the description. But it was very educational and spoke a lot about how complex the ownership was, and to get the ownership of the canal. The first part of the museum covers the early evidence of human presence on the isthmus, and that dates back 10,000 years ago. So it was an amazing collection of these antiquities that have been recovered throughout the Panama region, and it was also really interesting to learn about how people traversed the area, and then when they actually started to kind of expand and explore the area and settle into new and different regions. The exhibit then goes on to explain how everything about the indigenous people's lives changed in 1492 when the Spanish came in search of new trade routes. They came to the isthmus and brought with them diseases, forced labor, a lot of confrontations, and a rapid colonization process began. Development and progress were coming, and that brought with it the construction of the railroad. Many people from different continents came to help build the railroad. Many Chinese people, actually. That's how there's such a big Chinese presence in Panama. And sadly, in about 1852, there were around 100,000 enslaved Africans that were brought to the isthmus. As travel was becoming more expanded in the mid to late 1800s, Ferdinand de Lesseps came to the isthmus and started conducting a feasibility study if there could be a waterway canal that could be built to bridge the seas. De Lesseps had raised the equivalent of around $214 million, but over the years of trying and trying again, the mission failed. There were a lot of things that happened in a kind of short period of time, relatively. I'm going to try and just make a synopsis of it. But the Isthmus of Panama had wanted to gain separation and independence from Colombia. They had been kind of ruled by Colombia. They just didn't, have enough strength to be on their own as a country. The United States was interested in building the canal once they had agreed that it was actually going to be in Panama across the isthmus and not in Nicaragua. So the United States had an agreement with the isthmus. Hey, we'll support your independence and you let us build the canal. And Colombia at the time was preoccupied with other things. said, sure, that's fine. Just give us $25 million and you can, take care of this project that you're going to do for the canal. So in 1903, the Hay-Bonao-Varia Treaty was signed by John Hay, who was Secretary of State of the U.S., and Philippe Jean Bonneau-Varia, who was a French diplomatic representative of Panama. No Panamanian was actually present to sign that treaty. This is the one where I'm a little confused as to whether the treaty included that there would be a colonized zone, or if the Panamanians understood that they would still have, free range of their land. So in the early 1900s, 1903, starting with that agreement in place with Panama, the new Republic of Panama, the U.S. comes in and starts to create the Canal Zone, which on 5 miles on either side of the canal is only for U.S. citizens. That means that they had their own schools, they had their own medical facilities, they had their own post office, they had their own stores to buy things, they probably had their own jails and basically government systems. Panamanians were only allowed in to work if they were working for one of the families, doing domestic chores. They were only allowed in to work. They could not be there after dark in that canal zone. And imagine seeing this inequity in your newly formed republic, that you're basically excluded from an area, a territory of land. And this goes on for many, many years. So this was going on for decades. This is where that statement when President Molino of Panama was quoted as saying something about this is a generational struggle. I wasn't really clear on what he meant. And now I completely understand after going through the museum and seeing the plight of the Panamanians for sovereignty. You could feel the struggle. I mean, it's palpable when you're in the museum and, seeing the exhibits, and you can just, you see the inequity. There were separations of, they would class them gold and silver. So if you were classified like a gold payroll person, you earned more money for the same job that someone might be doing who was of color and who was paid less. The accommodations were different. The gold status people had sleeping quarters that were comfortable, spacious, and had, decor and china and, comfortable things. And the silver status people slept in like a bunkhouse. The gold status people working on the canal had dining halls with table service. They could sit leisurely, have their meal, and they were served. And the silver status people had to wait in long lines for food that was probably just like the waste food or very cheap, inexpensive food. And they often had to eat standing up. And they didn't have many like changes of clothing. Apparently they were even just given like one set of clothes. So this led to illness and disease, when you're in close quarters and there's germs and bacteria. So there were problems and discontent brewing and percolating. Life was great in the Canal Zone if you were white and from the United States. There were parties and it was fun and there were movies to go to and restaurants, everything within the zone. And they could go outside of the zone safely to experience parts of Panama and maybe feel like they were having an adventure. But I look at these faces and I see people who are just trying to improve their lives and the lives of their families and working hard. Building that canal was not easy. So many people died from disease or just exhaustion. These people are sleeping in the afternoon, just in the dirt. And the United States decided they could arrest anyone they wanted to and put them in jail. The original treaty of 1903 had many problems that Panamanians were dissatisfied with. As time went on, there was a greater military presence in the Canal Zone during World War II in the 1940s. And imagine being locked out of your own sovereign land. In 1964, it all came to a head when Panamanian students attempted to raise the Panamanian flag at Balboa High School, where there was only an American flag. The flag was torn in the scuffle and violence broke out. 22 Panamanians were killed, 4 U.S. soldiers were killed. It was 3 days of fighting. But this was the incident that then started the talks about transferring the canal to Panamanian control. There are so many interesting little facts of information about who was leading in the United States and who was leading in Panama. But eventually, the Torrijos and Carter Treaty became legal after getting 2/3 of a Senate vote, which was hard fought because people were opposing the United States giving this territory over to a small, at that point, third world country. But in 1981, Omar Torrijos died and Manuel Noriega took power over Panama. And in 1989, the United States invaded Panama on Operation Just Cause, claiming that they needed to oust Manuel Noriega. One of the most beautiful things about this museum was a booth for people who have experienced the 1989 invasion to leave a story of remembrance and to document what their experience was. I think it's safe to say these were very uncertain times. There were 10 years left when the canal was to be turned over to the Panamanians in 1999, and tensions were high. But somehow they managed to get through it. Since the treaties, the Panama Canal Authority is the agency of the Panama government that's responsible for the operation and management of the canal. This was established under Title 14 of the Panamanian National Constitution. There are 11 board of directors, and they are the ones that establish the policies for the operation, improvements, and modernization of the canal. I stopped for a few minutes at the overlook of the canal and the bridge, the Panama Canal and the bridge, and the monument that the Chinese had constructed to celebrate their 150 years being a part of Panama from when they came over to build the railroad. And I just went to the Panama Canal Museum in Casco Viejo, and I'm kind of overwhelmed with thoughts and feelings. I don't know like how to separate them out, right now because of the threats against Panama. My inclination is to lead with the emotional plea and the little factoids of history to, state my support and evidence finding for Panama's sovereignty, which I shouldn't even have to do, right? But there are so many people in the United States who just blatantly and falsely claim that the Panama Canal is ours. We need to take it back. I really was just getting kind of sick to my stomach of reading all those pumped up bravado, ownership, entitled comments. I was deciding whether or not I was even going to make a video about the Panama Canal and my thoughts on things, and I'm so glad that I decided to go to the museum. That museum is incredible. It is one of the best museums I've ever been to. It's really well put together. It's a wealth of information, and they have a tremendous collection of artifacts and documents. And in fact, the 1977 Torrijos and Carter Treaty is there. And that's pretty incredible to see. So when I hear on the news that Trump so simplistically says, that Panama is not abiding by the treaty, the 1977 treaty, which is also false because there are only Panamanians that operate the canal. But when I hear him say these lies, and when I know that people believe these lies, it upsets me. I get angry because Panama's a small country, and I know the history of the United States can be a bully. I mean, that's what they have a reputation for. They had a reputation for also being helpful. I think that history is past now with this new regime of America first. I would like to start with some facts. During the time that the United States was building the canal from 1904 to 1914, there was a total number of 5,611 deaths. 350 of those were American citizens. Another fact is that the U.S. was not granted free passage of any warships as claimed by Marco Rubio and Donald Trump. That would actually be a violation of the treaty. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I tried to keep it obviously as accurate as possible from what I remembered and what I took pictures of on the information from the Canal Museum. There are plenty of online resources. The treaty is actually available in, I think, PDF form. Maybe even the 1903 treaty. I didn't even know about that one before. definitely recommend visiting the Canal Museum. It is just incredible. It's a very, very well done museum. And enjoy Panama. They're an amazing country of people.